You sit here before me, and I can see the subtle tension in your shoulders, the way your breath catches when silence falls. You have not come here for pleasantries, but because something inside you has been pressing against the fragile glass of your restraint. It is the moment I have called the day the empath snaps. I speak not of petty anger, nor of theatrical rebellion, but of the deep and irreversible instant when the soul that has been holding the wounds of the world suddenly refuses to be the world's sponge. And when that happens, the very archetypes within you shift their places, as if the constellations of the psyche have realigned while you slept. For years, perhaps decades, you have stood at the gates of other people's pain, believing it to be your duty, or perhaps your destiny to receive it. You have mistaken this capacity for a gift, for a divine assignment, and yet the unconscious has its own secret laws. Nothing is given freely in the psyche without its shadow. Your compassion has been stalked all this time by its own predator, the invisible compulsion to absorb, to take on, to become the living graveyard for another's unspoken grief. This is the kind of love that quietly poisons the one who offers it, until the taste in the mouth is no longer sweetness but iron. It begins innocently, as all such psychic patterns do. The child, sensitive to the tremors in the household, learns to read the air before the adults even speak. She knows when a parent's mood has shifted, feels the unspoken tension like a change in weather. She adapts, becomes light when the air is heavy, quiet when the atmosphere is brittle. This is the birth of the empath, not as a saintly figure, but as a survival strategist. The persona that forms here is a mask of grace over a trembling child, and once the archetype has taken its place, it is not so easily removed. The child grows into an adult who still believes that the only way to remain safe is to remain open, receptive, unguarded, to the point of self-erasure. But the unconscious never allows such imbalance to stand forever. Within the shadow, that vast reservoir of everything you have denied yourself, the opposite begins to form. Every time you said yes when you meant no, the shadow whispered a refusal. Every time you forgave, before you had even acknowledged the wound, the shadow recorded the debt. And every time you carried a burden that was not yours, the shadow quietly stored its weight in the deepest vault of your being. This vault is not infinite. The day the empath snaps is the day the vault door bursts open, and the stored shadows come rushing out like floodwater that has been dammed for years. When that day comes, it is not a gentle correction. It is an archetypal event, and archetypes are not interested in politeness. You may wake one morning and find yourself unable to tolerate the smallest trespass. The friend whose calls you once answered at 2 in the morning will hear only your silence. The family member whose rage you have absorbed without protest will meet a wall where there was once a soft field. This transformation is not cruelty. It is the psyche reasserting its law of balance. What was once bent toward others must now bend toward you. From the outside, it may look as if you have become cold, detached, even selfish. But I tell you, this is the first breath of true individuation. Individuation is not the art of pleasing all gods. It is the long and often painful work of discovering which God truly claims your soul. The God of overgiving is a false idol. It demands sacrifice without end and offers only exhaustion in return. The day you turn away from it is the day you begin to walk toward the center of your own self, that inner totality which has waited patiently while you poured yourself into the endless needs of others. This snapping is not merely a personal moment, it is a psychic initiation. In myth, we see it mirrored in countless forms. The warrior who lays down his sword and refuses to fight another's war, the healer who walks into the wilderness to tend to her own wounds, the prophet who stops speaking to the crowd and listens only for the voice in the wind. Such figures are not abandoning their calling, they are refining it. For an empath who has been living at the mercy of other people's storms, the snap is the call to build a shelter, to stand within it, and to learn the weather of their own soul. In the dream language of the unconscious, this moment might appear as a locked door that suddenly opens, revealing a room you have never entered. Inside, there may be a figure, perhaps your own double, sitting in the dark, looking at you with calm, unblinking eyes. This is the part of you that has been waiting for your return. It has no interest in your persona, no concern for the roles you have played. It knows only the truth of your essence, stripped of the endless reflex to be needed. And when you meet its gaze, something in you will shift so profoundly that you will not be able to return to your old ways, even if you try. But the snapping is also dangerous, because it is raw power reclaimed from the unconscious, and power that returns suddenly can burn if not guided. Here lies the importance of consciousness. If you snap in a blind rage, you may cut ties not only with those who drain you, but also with those who genuinely love you. If you withdraw entirely, you may slip into isolation and mistake it for freedom. The archetype of the hermit has its wisdom, but when it comes too soon, it becomes exiled. To navigate this transformation wisely, you must bring the contents of the shadow into awareness, not merely unleash them. When the empath snaps, the collective unconscious feels it too, for you have been a vessel through which the suffering of others was partially eased, not healed, perhaps, but diffused. When you stop absorbing, those around you are confronted with their own pain in a way they have long avoided. Some will resist, some will rage, some will crumble, and you must be prepared to let them. Your withdrawal will be their mirror, and not all will wish to look into it. Yet this is the necessary cruelty of truth. It demands that each soul carry its own burden, not outsource it indefinitely. You may find in the weeks or months after the snapping, the dreams come more vividly, as if the psyche is celebrating its restored sovereignty. You might dream of returning to a childhood home and finding it empty, yet filled with light, or of standing at the edge of a vast body of water knowing you are finally free to swim. These dreams are not merely symbols, they are the language of yourself, assuring you that you have stepped onto a new path, and yet the path will not remain easy, for the old patterns will call you back in moments of weakness. The compulsion to rescue is a tenacious ghost, and it will visit you again and again, whispering that you are needed, that you are the only one who can save them. In those moments, remember this: the truest help you can offer another is not to carry their pain, but to stand as a living example of one who has faced their own. Only then does your empathy become clean, unburdened by the hidden transaction of self-sacrifice. Only then does your compassion come from abundance rather than depletion. And only then does your soul rest in the knowledge that it belongs first to itself and to the deep, eternal source from which all true healing flows. When the empath snaps, what emerges from the depths is not merely a change in behavior, but a reorganization of the psychic architecture itself. The persona, that carefully constructed mask you have worn for so long, the face that smiles even in exhaustion, that nods in agreement even when the soul recoils, begins to crack. Behind it, the archetypes you have neglected stir like ancient gods returning from exile. The warrior appears first, not with a sword raised in blind violence, but with the quiet authority of one who has finally claimed the right to guard their own boundaries. The warrior is not concerned with being liked. It is concerned with what is right for the self. Its eyes are steady, its posture unyielding, and it stands at the threshold of your life like a sentinel who has been asleep for centuries. But alongside the warrior comes the shadow, the great and terrible twin of your conscious self. For years, the shadow has carried everything you refuse to express: the anger at being used, the grief at being unseen, the deep and unspoken resentment toward those who assumed your kindness was endless. When the shadow steps forward, it can feel overwhelming, as though the darkness within you is greater than the light. Yet this is only because you are seeing it for the first time without the veil of denial. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the guardian of your wholeness. It demands to be known, not eradicated. If you resist this encounter, if you try to push the shadow back into the basement of the unconscious, it will not disappear. It will find other ways to speak through illness, through inexplicable bitterness, through dreams that leave you unsettled for days. The psyche does not tolerate one-sidedness. It will always move toward balance, and balance cannot be achieved if half of you is buried alive. The empath who snaps but refuses to integrate the shadow risks becoming the very thing they fled, a figure who drains others, though now in subtler ways, demanding from the world the validation that was once given away. In the dreamscape of the newly awakened empath, certain symbols appear again and again. One may dream of wild animals, wolves, bears, panthers, watching from the edges of a forest. These are not threats. They are your own instinctual powers, long exiled, because they frightened the polite world you sought to belong to. Another dream may show you breaking through walls or cutting through ropes that have bound your hands. This is the psyche's way of showing liberation, but also of warning. Freedom without direction can dissolve into chaos. The archetype of the wanderer lurks here, and while it offers adventure, it can also lead you into aimlessness if you do not anchor yourself in the self. The self, in Jungian terms, is not your ego, not your list of preferences and opinions. It is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, past and potential. When the empath snaps, the self is calling for union, not war. It does not ask you to destroy your empathy, but to purify it. True empathy does not come at the expense of the one who gives it. It flows from a source that cannot be depleted because it is connected to something greater than the ego's desire to be needed. This is why the snapping can feel mystical. It is as though the soul itself has intervened, refusing to let you continue the slow erosion of your spirit. You may find in this stage that relationships shift dramatically. Some will fall away with startling speed, as though they were held together only by the glue of your self-sacrifice. Others may deepen now that you are showing up as a whole being rather than a caretaker with hidden resentment, and still others may go through a period of rupture before they are reborn on new terms. This is the relational cost of individuation. Every myth of transformation speaks to it. Persephone must leave the familiar world to become queen of the underworld. Inanna must be stripped of her garments before she meets her shadow sister. Christ must go into the wilderness before beginning his ministry. The snapping is your descent. You are stripping your wilderness. It is tempting in this period to harden completely, to declare that you will never again be vulnerable. This is a necessary stage, but it must not become permanent. The heart that has been open for too long must close for a time in order to heal. But it is not meant to remain closed. The danger here is that the empath who snaps becomes the cynic who trusts no one, and in doing so, loses the ability to connect at all. The self will not be satisfied with such an outcome. It will call you back toward openness, but this time an openness tempered with discernment, one that can say yes and no with equal clarity. The alchemy of this transformation is slow. You will cycle through grief for the years you lost to overgiving, anger at those who took advantage of you, and relief at the freedom you now taste. You may even mourn the old self, flawed though it was, because it was the self who kept you alive in a world that did not yet know how to honor your boundaries. But in time, you will see that what is dying is not your kindness, but the illusion that kindness must cost you everything. In certain moments, you will feel as if you are meeting yourself for the first time. You may notice desires you never allowed yourself to have, or creative impulses that were buried under the weight of tending to others. The psyche, once freed from the compulsion to constantly monitor other people's emotional weather, begins to generate its own climate, one in which you can finally grow without fear of overshadowing someone else. This is the fertile soil in which individuation takes root, and yet there will be tests. Life has a way of sending old patterns in new disguises to see if you have truly changed. The friend who always needs rescuing will appear again, or perhaps a new acquaintance whose suffering calls to your heart like an old song. In those moments, the choice is yours, to step back into the role you once played, or to remain in the center of your own circle, offering compassion without abandoning yourself. Each time you choose the latter, the self strengthens its hold, and the false gods of overgiving lose their power. The day the empath snaps is not the end of your empathy. It is the beginning of its transformation. You will still feel deeply, still sense the undercurrents in a room. You still know when someone is hiding their pain. But you will no longer take that pain into your own body, as if it were your duty to suffer for them. Instead, you will stand as a witness, a mirror, a presence that holds space without being consumed. This is empathy in its purest form, not martyrdom, but mutual recognition of the sacred in each soul. And here is the paradox. When you no longer allow yourself to be drained, you will find that you have more to give than ever before. But now your giving will be free, unbound by compulsion, untouched by the shadow of resentment. You will give because it is your nature, not because it is your prison, and in that freedom, your empathy will become not a burden, but a gift that flows from the inexhaustible well of the self. There is a moment, after the storm of snapping has passed, when the world feels unnaturally still. It is not the stillness of peace, not yet, but the stillness of an empty stage. After the actors have left, you stand in the center, holding the remnants of your old life in your hands, and you realize that the script you have been performing for years no longer fits. The lines fall flat on your tongue. The gestures feel foreign. This is the disorientation of psychic rebirth. The empath you once were has died, or more precisely, the persona you built around that identity has dissolved. Now you are faced with the vast and uncertain question, who am I? When I am no longer the one who absorbs, the unconscious, in its wisdom, often answers such questions through dreams. Many who have passed through this snapping speak of dreaming about temples ancient, ruined or newly constructed, and of being summoned inside by a figure they cannot entirely see. This temple is not a place in the outer world, but the inner sanctum of the self. You may find its corridors lined with mirrors, each reflecting not your current face, but fragments of selves you have been in other times. Other moments, some of these reflections will be familiar, others will unsettle you. This is the mind's way of showing that you are not a singular, static identity, but a constellation of archetypes and memories, each waiting for its turn in the light. Among these archetypes, one will step forward with particular significance after the snapping, the anima or animus. Depending on your primary conscious orientation, if you are more consciously aligned with the masculine principle, the anima will come not as a romanticized muse, but as the embodiment of your own soul's feeling life, long neglected in the service of others' emotions. If you are more consciously aligned with the feminine principle, the animus will arrive not as the domineering inner critic that once drove you to serve endlessly, but as the clear, steady voice of inner authority. Meeting this figure is transformative, for it reveals the depths you have overlooked in yourself while tending so vigilantly to others. The anima may appear in dreams as a woman of impossible beauty, standing at the edge of a dark forest, beckoning you to follow her into the unknown. She does not speak, but her gaze tells you that the path ahead will not be safe. Only necessary, the animus may come as a quiet, strong presence who hands you a key and points toward a locked door you had not noticed before. Both carry the same message. There is more to you than the role you have played, and it is time to explore the uncharted chambers of your being. This exploration, however, is not without its dangers. The energy released when the empath snaps can be intoxicating. After years of suppressing your own needs, the sudden permission to claim them can tip into excess. You may find yourself swinging to the opposite extreme, cutting off more than necessary, refusing help or intimacy for fear of being drawn back into old patterns. The psyche will tolerate this imbalance for a while as a corrective phase, but eventually it will demand integration. The goal is not to become invulnerable, but to become whole. Wholeness, as I use the term, is not perfection. It is the capacity to hold contradictions without collapsing into one side or the other. The true empath who has passed through the snapping can feel deeply without drowning, can care without controlling, can love without losing themselves. This balance is hard-won and must be maintained through ongoing self-awareness. Without it, the old compulsion may return in subtle forms disguised as duty, loyalty, or even love. It is here that the image of the inner temple becomes crucial. You must learn to tend it as a sacred space. In practical terms, this means establishing rituals, not rituals imposed from outside, but those born from your own psyche's language. For some, it may be the daily writing of dreams, to keep the conversation with the unconscious alive. For others, it might be time in solitude, walking without destination, allowing the soul to speak in symbols rather than words. These acts are not luxuries. They are the maintenance of your psychic foundation. Without them, the temple decays, and you will find yourself once again vulnerable to the tides of others' needs. In myth, the temple is often guarded by a threshold figure, a sphinx, a dragon, an angel with a flaming sword. These are not enemies, but guardians, ensuring that only the worthy may enter. After the snapping, you must become your own threshold guardian. You must know who and what is allowed into the sanctuary of your inner life and who must remain outside. This is not about judgment, it is about discernment. Without such guardianship, the temple becomes a marketplace and the sacred is lost. There will be times when the outer world does not understand your transformation. Those who once relied on your endless availability may accuse you of hardness or betrayal. They will try to invoke the old contracts to remind you of the times you saved them, the ways you have always been there. It will be tempting to return, to prove you are still good, still kind, still the person they remember. But you must remember, the snapping was not an accident. It was the soul's intervention. To go back now would be to undo the very healing you have begun. Instead, you can offer a different kind of presence, one that does not rescue, but witnesses. When someone you love is in pain, you can stand beside them without taking their pain into your own body. When they rage or weep, you can let their emotions move through the air without absorbing them like a sponge. This is not detachment. It is the deepest form of respect for their process and for your own boundaries. It is a recognition that each soul must walk its own path to healing, and that you are not the path, but perhaps, at most, a lantern along the way. In the weeks and months following the snapping, you may feel both lighter and heavier. Lighter, because the chains of overgiving have fallen away. Heavier, because you now see more clearly the weight of responsibility each person carries for their own soul. This clarity can be sobering, but it is also liberating. For the first time, you can look at another's suffering without the reflex to take it from them. And in doing so, you allow them the dignity of their own transformation. In dreams, this phase may be marked by images of flight birds, airplanes, wings sprouting from your back. These are symbols of transcendence, of rising above the old entanglements. But flight is not escape, it is perspective. From above, you can see the patterns that once ensnared you, the repeating loops of rescue and depletion. And from this vantage point, you can choose differently. As the months turn into years, the snapping becomes less of a single event and more of a threshold you crossed long ago. The urgency fades, replaced by a steady knowing. You are no longer driven by the compulsion to be everything for everyone. You are no longer defined by the wounds of your past, though you carry their wisdom, and in that quiet certainty, you may discover that the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to the world is the unwavering truth of who you are when you are no longer afraid to be whole. And so the path brings you to the final turning, not a dramatic climax, but a quiet homecoming. The day the empath snaps is the thunder, but what follows is the slow greening of the earth after the storm. You have walked through the dismantling of your old self, faced the shadow without fleeing, entered the temple within, and learned the vigilance of a threshold guardian. Now the work is to integrate all that has awakened so that the change does not remain a fracture, but becomes a foundation. Integration is not a matter of stitching the old and the new selves together. It is a recreation of your psychic whole, one in which every part of you has a rightful place. This is when the dream shifts. No longer are you moving through corridors of ruin or forests of menace. You begin to dream of returning to a throne, not an opulent seat of worldly dominion, but a chair carved from the living rock of a mountain, placed in the center of a great hall, lit by a sky that seems both day and night at once. This throne belongs to no ego. It belongs to the self. When you take your seat there, you feel the unmistakable sensation that you are exactly where you have always been meant to be, and that you have been away for a very long time. Sitting here, you do not rule others. You rule the inner kingdom where every archetype, the warrior, the healer, the shadow, the animus has its voice in the council. They do not speak over one another. They do not pull you apart with conflicting demands. They stand in the harmony of a circle because you, the sovereign of this realm, have learned to listen without surrendering your center. This is the psychic order that emerges when the empath's snapping is integrated. Empathy is no longer a compulsion, nor is self-protection a fortress. They coexist as two wings of the same bird, each necessary for flight. The paradox you now live with is that your sensitivity has not diminished, it has deepened. You feel the currents in a room more acutely than ever, but they no longer dictate your course. You sense another's grief like a subtle vibration in the air, yet you know it is not yours to carry. You can love fiercely without becoming consumed, and you can walk away without severing the invisible thread of respect that binds one soul to another. This is a strange and holy maturity of an empath who has passed through the snapping to be permeable to the world's beauty and pain, yet sovereign in deciding what may enter the heart. And so life begins to change around you because the world always reforms itself around the truth you embody. People approach you differently. Some will feel an unnameable reverence, sensing that you are not someone to entangle, but someone to meet as an equal. Others will be unsettled, unable to lure you back into the familiar dance of need and depletion. A few will try to test your boundaries, as if to see whether this transformation is real or only a phase. They will discover what you already know, that you do not need to defend yourself loudly, for your know is rooted in the very stone of your throne. The deeper mystery, however, is that the snapping has not made you harder. It has made you softer in the ways that matter most. Before, your kindness was tangled with fear, fear of abandonment, fear of disapproval, fear of becoming invisible if you were not indispensable. Now your kindness is free of these chains, and so it shines more clearly. Before, your love had the scent of desperation. Now it carries the fragrance of choice, and those who can meet you here in this clarity find a love that is not heavy with obligation, but light with the joy of mutual recognition. You may wonder from time to time, what would have happened if you had never snapped? If you had continued to absorb, to give, to carry the unending burdens of others? The image that comes is often stark, a well running dry, a vessel cracking from within, a temple turned to dust because no one guarded its gates. The psyche will sometimes show you this in dreams, not to frighten you, but to remind you that the snapping was not a failure of compassion. it was an act of survival ordained by the self itself. There will still be moments when you feel the old pull, when someone's pain catches your breath, or when the urge to rescue flares like an old reflex. But now you know how to pause. You can stand in that moment, feel the pull, and choose with awareness. Sometimes you will step forward, sometimes you will step back. Either way, the choice will be yours, and that makes all the difference. The snapping was the rupture. The integration is the return. You have come back not to the person you were before. The overgiving began, that self is gone. As all selves of the past are gone, but to something deeper, something older, something eternal. It is the self that has watched every mask you have worn, every role you have played, and waited for you to remember that you are not any of them. And in this remembering, you are free. So here you are, no longer the sponge for the world's wounds, no longer the martyr for unspoken contracts, no longer the silent witness to your own erasure. You are the empath who has walked into the shadow and returned with the light intact. You are the sovereign of your own soul, seated once more on the throne that was yours before fear taught you to stand in the courtyard. And from this seat, you can give not because you must, but because you choose to, and because the well within you is now fed by the inexhaustible spring of the self. This is the day after the snapping, the day the world meets the true you. And it will never be the same.